Welcome back to Unit 2, Evolution of Humankind of BSHF 101 Foundation Course in Humanities and Social Sciences. And we are at Book 1, Human Society and... So it keeps disconnecting me from you, but I'm there, so you also stay there. तो हम लोग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स पढ़ रहे थे. हाउ रीडिंग दिस यूनिट यू शुड बी आफ्टर रीडिंग दिस यूनिट you should be able to know how tool making using played how tool making or tool using played an important role in the evolution of the culture, how cultural evolution took place in stages with changes in tool making using ability of human beings, how did human beings adapt to and interact with nature, and with what implications to their coexistence. How did knowing individual evolve over the years till date? Provide an evolutionary perspective of tool making use. And I think this is misprinted or chalice the chaps in tool making the by making the use by human being. I think should be analyze something like that. I don't know. It's misprinted in my book. तो आप लोग देख लेना. Examine the various facts of adaptation and interaction between nature and human being, and explain the evolution of human being as a thinking animal. 2. Reconnected. 2.1 Introduction. You have learned in the Unit 1 why care is necessary in developing a scientific method for the study of human beings. They assimilate and represent both nature and culture. They share biological characteristics from nature and also overcome them through their superior intellectual, creative, and cultural abilities. The history of the evolution of human beings is a lone one from the Stone Age to the electronic and the nuclear age. In this unit, we offer you evidence of how evolution took place. However, here we shall limit our discussion up the Iron Age. The specific natural abilities of human beings contributed to their cultural and technological success in forging tools, adaptation to natural environments, and making inventions. All these led to growth of successive stages, periods of social and cultural changes. Some of the remarkable contributions resulting out of this evolutionary transformation include division of labor, agriculture and industry, urbanization, and revolutionary leaps in the field of knowledge. It also contributed to the growth of various religious systems and their philosophy. Scientific knowledge, too, grew together with this purpose, with this process. The interaction between human endeavor and natural forces always creates problems of adaptation. Too much exploitation of nature alters the balance of relationships between nature and man. The adaptation of human being to nature has therefore been always a matter of great social concern. In this unit, we introduce you to several aspects of the relationship between human beings and nature that contributed towards the march of human civilization. 2.2 Tool making or using an evolutionary perspective. It is often believed that some advanced primates may have used bones and stones as tools, but with the coming of the Homo sapiens, tool making and tool using began in the true sense. Only then tools as we know them emerged. The human being is an animal that not only uses tools but also constantly improves upon them. It is this tool making ability that has brought us to the present stage. Had it stopped at some stage, then perhaps the world would never have been what it is today. You may be interested to know that the first human being ever to have lived in a complete environment dates back to about 50 lakh years. He is known as the Peking man. That you may be interested to know that the first human being ever to have lived in a complete environment dates back to about 50 lakh years. It is known as the Peking man. On the basis of tool making skills of human beings, archaeologists have arranged human history into the following periods: the Stone Age, Old and New, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. However, all the stages did not evolve simultaneously in all parts of the world. If one religion witnessed the Stone Age, in another region, Bronze Age had started. If one region witnessed the Stone Age, in another region, Bronze Age had started, and in the third region, Iron Age had come. 2.2.1 The Old Stone Age. Old Stone Age or the Paleolithic period began somewhere between 5 lakh to 2 lakh 50,000 years ago. In the Old Stone Age, human beings lived entirely on hunting, fishing, and gathering. The tools they fashioned from stone for this purpose were rudimentary in character. These tools only enabled them to live off nature and not to invest in it. Their requirements were met through trapping, hunting, plucking, and digging. They had no control over nature, rather, they were dependent on it. In cultural evolution, this period is described as a stage of savagery as depicted by Morgan, a British anthropologist. Roughly chipped flint served a variety of purposes, from killing a prey to removing the skins to digging up the roots and tubers. 2.2.2 The New Stone Age. The New Stone Age or the Neolithic period began some 10,000 years to 12,000 years ago. In this age, human beings were able to increase and thus control to some extent the supply of food. They did this by cultivating cereals and breeding animals. This period also provided us with evidence for the existence of granaries. I think I should put on the headphones. ये मुझे पहले करना चाहिए था. So this period also provided us with the evidence for the existence of granaries or stone houses, which imply that food was often produced in excess of current requirements. The cultural characteristics of this period correspond roughly with what Morgan called the barbaric age. It is during this period of Neolithic revolution that pottery, the techniques of spinning wool, flax, and cotton into threads come into use. Finally, fashioned stone axes sharpened by grinding also made their appearance at this time. I hope everything is perfect. 2.2.3 The Bronze Age. The next revolution in tool making came with the Bronze Age about 5,000 years ago, that is around 3000 BC. This period supported an urban population, skilled craftsmen, traders, priests, and writers. Now the principal metals were used for making tools and weapons. This period is described as the Bronze Age. The revolutionary implications of the Bronze Age may not have been possible if human beings had not discovered the ability to mold, melt, and fuse copper. By 3000 BC, not only was the technique of mixing copper and tin to make bronze known in India, Mesopotamia, and Greece, but the wheel also had been discovered. The application of the wheel with copper nails revolutionized transportation, and two-wheeled and four-wheeled carts were being commonly used by this time for a variety of purposes. By this time, wind too was being used as a source of energy, primarily to aid water transportation. We find sailboats being used from Polynesia to Egypt. The ruins of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa tell us of the application of kiln-fired bricks, which meant a huge expenditure of fuel and the ability of the artisans to control high temperatures. In the Bronze Age, there are evidences to suggest that land was systematically reclaimed from swamp and desert, and record quantities of foodstuffs were being produced Artificial waterways also helped to protect society against the vagaries of the weather. 2.2.2 The Iron Age. Iron Age commenced at around 1200 BC. Unlike copper and tin, which are quite rare and hence expensive, iron is one of the commonest elements found in the Earth's crust. Hence, it should not be taken to mean that iron was a commonly available metal at that time. In the beginning, it was, however, a rare metal. The extraction of iron from its ore follows more or less the same technique as with the extraction of copper. The secret of its production was, however, kept closely guarded, and it took several years for this knowledge to seep slowly through a variety of sources before it was universalized across several cultures. In the period of the Bronze Age technology, large empires had emerged in Greece, Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, etc. The invention of iron tools and weapons by the barbarians of Eurasia posed a major threat to the empires. Iron was used in India around 1000 BC, and excavations show that iron weapons such as arrowheads, spearheads were used commonly in western Uttar Pradesh from around 800 BC. In the words of Gordon Schild, cheap iron democratized agriculture and industry and warfare too. Any peasant could afford an iron axe to clear fresh land for himself and iron plowshares wherewith to break up stony ground. In the past, the superior tools and weapons were rare and expensive. The discovery of iron leveled these differences. Check your progress. Read the following questions carefully and mark the right answers. In each question, you may find more than one right answer. During Old Stone Age period, procured food by cultivation of crops, from hunting, by gathering it from jungles, by importing it from other countries. So first के अंदर जो harvesting of cultivation of crops है, from hunting है और gathering it from jungles है, वो true है. Old Stone Age period में यही होता था. Which of the following statements are true or false during New Stone Age? तो statements दी गई हैं. No surplus food was available after its consumption, which is false. People were not aware of the techniques of making hand axe. Not a good one, I would say. People used to breed animals, true. Bones were used for making, not true. People did not breed animals at the old stage. Bones were used for making weapons, that is true. The bronze tools, number 3, the bronze tools were made of copper, tin, mixture of copper and iron, a mixture of copper and tin. So right answer is the mixture of copper and tin. So you have my apologies. It keeps disconnecting. तो ये डिस्कनेक्ट होता रहता है यूट्यूब से लगातार, लेकिन जैसे मैंने आपको पहले कहा है कि आप बने रहें. तो हम कर रहे थे चेक योर प्रोग्रेस. उसमें था एक क्वेश्चन, विंड पावर एंड व्हील वर यूज्ड फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम ड्यूरिंग द ओल्ड स्टोन एज, द न्यू स्टोन एज, आयरन एज और द ब्रॉन्ज एज. तो आयरन एज के अंदर जो है वो विंड पावर और व्हील का इस्तेमाल शुरू हो गया था. ड्यूरिंग द फिफ्थ क्वेश्चन है, ड्यूरिंग द आयरन एज आयरन वॉज यूज्ड फॉर मेकिंग गन्स, रॉन्ग. मेकिंग एक्सेस फॉर क्लियरिंग फॉरेस्ट, राइट. मेकिंग प्लशेयर्स फॉर एग्रीकल्चर, राइट. मेकिंग मशीन्स, रॉन्ग. 2.3 टूल मेकिंग और टूल यूजिंग एंड मार्च ऑफ कल्चर. Human beings of every race, creed and color possesses identical abilities and are all Homo sapiens. From Paleolithic time, human beings were not just a tool making, hunting and procreating species. They possessed a spiritual culture, had a vivid notion of spirit, and performed sacrifices and buried the dead with considerable ceremony. This is not all. Their spiritual culture was enriched by paintings, etchings, and engravings. On the Neolithic age, you find yet another great leap in the culture of human beings, with the ability to grow wheat and barley, control over livestock, and advances in the art of pottery. ये कब हुआ? Neolithic age में. They took place quite a substantial development of culture. Many inventions were and discoveries of this period, such as zamargi or brewing beer or the making of pottery, are attributed to the work of Neolithic women. While man cleared land, made huts, hunted, looked after its livestock, and he manufactured the necessary tools, it was the women who tiled plots, cooked, spun, and baked the earthen pots. They also manufactured ornaments and articles for magical and spiritual ceremonies. 2.3.1 Social institutions and interactions. The Neolithic human beings were, however, still quite isolated. Their villages were generally self sufficient, and the production of food was just about enough to support the existing population. These villages were generally situated in oases surrounded by desert waste, or at the foothills of the mountains, or in clearings in the dense forest. I'll just take your 1 minute of yours. Excuse me. Can you please lower that volume? I'm trying to do something here. Please. Okay, the next is while the man cleared land, made huts, hunted, looked after livestock, and manufactured the necessary tools, it was the woman who tilled plots, cooked, spun, and baked earthen pots. They also manufactured ornaments and articles for magical and spiritual ceremonies. 2.3.1 Social institutions and interactions. The Neolithic human beings were, however, still quite isolated. Their villages were generally self-sufficient, and the production of food was just about enough to support the existing population. These villages were generally situated in oases surrounded by desert waste, or at the foothills of mountains, or in the clearings in the dense forests. 2.3.2 Specialization and division of labor. The use of copper and bronze brought about another revolution. This age gave rise to specialists such as metallurgists and craftsmen. They began to form guilds and clans which zealously guarded the tricks of the trade. The coming of metal tools also made way for the development of a permanent ruling class. There was more interaction between different small settlements or villages. Women were also being displaced as the plot changed the technique of farming from plot cultivation to large scale agriculture. While the women generally used the two plots, it was the man who plugged fields. 2.3.3 Urban Revolution. During the Bronze Age, an urban revolution also took place. Sumer and Akkad, who were two great urban civilizations of this age. Towns became centers of a number of activities. Here, temples were constructed with the labor of hundreds of workers who had to be supervised and directed. To do this, an agricultural plan had to be drawn in advance. These outlines were laid out with the aid of strings. In India, not surprisingly, therefore, the ancient knowledge of agriculture was called the Salv or String Sutra. The impressive temples thus constructed also needed to be administered. Records of receipts and expenditures had to be kept. This spurred the invention of script writing around 2000 BC. As worship was so highly institutionalized, here it was natural that a specialized class of priests should also emerge. These priests were the first carriers of the literary tradition, and quite predictably, literary records generally portray the perspective of the priestly class. The disparity between the rich and the poor grew at an alarming rate from this time onwards. Extortions Ill treatment, slavery, and all kinds of exploitations were practiced by the rich upon the poor. This was made possible because of the technical sophistication that human beings acquired in the Bronze Age. This sophistication brought about surplus in food production, giving rise to stratification and formation of social hierarchy. The arithmetic, astronomy, medicine, and theology developed at an impressive pace. Egyptian science approximated the sign much more accurately than before. The solar calendar was developed in the Nile Valley. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, which were urban civilizations of later Bronze Age, also shared the characteristics of this revolution and knowledge with other Bronze Age civilizations. Along with the production of surplus food, superior tools, and the growth of learned class, one also finds increasing institutionalizations and ritualizations of religious systems. 2.3.4 Rise of Great Religions. Bronze Age showed further refinements in intellectual development. The Indus Valley civilization is a unique example of this. Further, we all know about the high intellectual levels of the Vedas and the Upanishads. These great texts were not only deal with the day-to-day matter of life, but delve into mysteries of life and other philosophical aspects. They describe in great detail the religious doctrines and the life of the people. The growth of religious doctrines took various forms. Gautama Buddha came out with his preachings and attained nirvana around 500 BC. Around this time, or perhaps a century later, Lao Tse and Confucius preached Taoism and Confucianism in China. Eastern Iran saw birth of the great prophet Zarathustra around the time the Iron Age began in Iran. Thus, we see a tendency in the Iron Age towards differentiation in the religious traditions of the Bronze Age priests. The most compelling problem in Iron Age theology was to reconcile the individual with the society. Soon, both in Greece and India, philosophy took a new turn and began to look at nature as comprising several constituent parts. This gave rise to the theory of atoms in Greece or Anu in India. Check your progress. What were the main changes brought about in the production system during Bronze and Iron Age? तो प्रोडक्शन में जो है वो ब्रॉन्ज और आयरन एज में क्या क्या चेंजेस आए थे? Which of the following statements are right or wrong? The Neolithic human beings seem to have been a peace-loving person. Wrong. The population in the Neolithic age was on the decrease. Wrong. Urban settlements were there in the Stone Age. There were. Mohenjo-daro is another example. Question number 3. Write 5 lines on what you know about the urban revolution. Okay. 2.4 Nature and human beings. Adaptation and interaction. Nature and human beings or unki adaptations and interactions. It is quite tempting to explain racial and cultural differences on the basis of climate and geography. You have seen this from earlier review of the developments in science, technology, and tool-making ability of human beings and their advances in culture, science, and religion. Such human differences cannot be understood through differences of geography. The impact of the Bronze Age or the Neolithic age was not limited to any one geographical area but spread all over Europe and Asia. Even the long darkness of the Paleolithic age was shared universally, as were its many artistic and spiritual attainments. 2.4.1 Patterns of adaptation. Even so, it is worthwhile to consider how the human being as a tool-making animal adapts to nature and also tries to tame nature. The Eskimos in the remote Arctic regions have adapted to their surroundings. One finds people of the same environment often have very different ways of life. For example, in Rajasthan, we find the nomadic tribes as well as people living in settled communities. Human beings, therefore, are relatively freer from their environment other than creations of nature. But environment places certain constraints on human beings. The Eskimos must have warm clothes, while tribal Santals can afford to even go naked. The Eskimos cannot practice agriculture but must hunt food for their existence. The Hopi knew agriculture techniques but are forced to comply with the desert conditions and their rains and with the desert conditions of their rains and hence depend upon flood waters to grow their maize. People also alter their environment to their knowledge. Where slash and burning cultivation takes place, vegetation and bushes are burnt to fertilize the soil. Self-made embankments to retain water is a common enough way by which human beings attempt to alter their environment, contrary to the simplistic belief that in primitive societies man only mystically perceives his environment. Contemporary anthropology has demonstrated that a tribal not living in a modern society is often an acute observer of the nature. 2.4.2 Tribes and their patterns of adaptation. Before tribes were touched by modern civilization, they had greater mobility and roamed in a larger area. Like the Neolithic man, they always took good care to return to the soil the nutrients that they exhausted in growing their produce. Though the tribals had much wider area to cultivate, even so, they would return to the same plot of land after leaving it fallow for some time before samplings were planted, so that the forest may regrow again. In this way, they were able to maintain the balance in nature to their advantage. The primitive then had come to terms with nature and his environment. In some cases, he also learned how to tame nature. This was most commonly evident in agricultural operations. The tribals know of less obvious properties of plants, fibers, roots, stones, fish, animals, etc. They also know something about the planetary cycles, the movement of the tides, weather systems, seasons, and so on. They can read signs in things. It helps them to forecast the length, duration, and intensity of the seasons. Natural catastrophes and pestilence and so forth. Much of this knowledge was carried on and improved upon in folk and peasant societies. 2.4.3 Interaction, Dependence, Conquest, and Harmony. From Paleolithic times onwards, man had been interacting with the adapting to nature through the medium of his tools. The Paleolithic man or the Kalahari bushman may have had very simple implements such as the planting dibble, the weed cutter, or the blade bone hoe. It is with the implements like these with the Paleolithic man interacted with the nature for food, shelter, and clothing. From the Neolithic time onwards, the attempt has always been to try and adapt to nature on an ever increasing scale according to requirements. The development of agriculture and animal rearing, the discoveries of bronze and iron, the invention of automated machines and vehicles are all examples of our many and growing effort to conquer nature. Interaction with nature has two aspects. Number one, simple adaptation to nature. And number two, attempt to dominate nature. Considering the vast powers of nature, what the human beings have been able to tap and train to their advantage is still very small by comparison. Yet, societies today are often too aggressive in their attitude towards nature with the little realization that there are some limits and constraints on using nature. It is in the nature of human beings to restlessly strive to reach new heights. But in this process, they have to reflect on their knowledge and train themselves to shape tools and technologies which are in harmony with nature and not always seek to dominate and indiscriminately destroy nature. With great despair, we notice all around us the deforestation of land and hills and the pollution of water and air. We watch with equal despair the development of industries and technologies which single-mindedly destroy our natural resources. One may not advocate a retreat from science, technology, and inventions. That would be both futile and anachronistic. The solution to our problems also lies in invention and uses of new technologies in a manner which is friendly to and not discriminative of the surrounding ecology. Let us not forget the harsh and miserable lives of hunters and gatherers of the past and how they died helplessly and in great pain from a host of disease. The wonders of science have helped to prolong the life of human beings, and would it not be wonderful if science could assure prolonged existence for their species? Check your progress 3. Question 1. Write in about 5 lines what do you know about the life of a tribal. And number 2. How have the human beings have interacting with nature? Answer in about 5 lines. 2.5 Evolution of human being as a thinking animal. As you may have seen above, human beings are alone among all the species of life who are able to make and use tools according to their requirements. At the same time, they kept moving up in the ladder of evolution in the world of living. How could all this be possible? A simple answer is that all this progress till date could be possibly largely owing to expansion and evolution of the thinking capabilities of human beings. Rest of this unit will address these facts in the evolution of human beings. 2.5.1 Unique capabilities of thinking human beings. The process of evolution endowed human beings with several unique capabilities. Only they have the ability to use symbols, to think, to laugh, to question about secrets of life and death. Such abilities are not found among other animals. Anthropologists have been studying how these capabilities evolved in humans. The large cranial, that means large brain capacity of humans, evolved to the percent average figure of 1450 cc from about 500 cc capacity. Slowly, over a period of 15 to 20,000 years, comparatively, the use of language evolved faster, but it was influenced by the growth of the size of the brain. Culture, yet another distinctive feature of human beings, comes from the ability of human to conceptualize and to abstract through the use of the symbols. It evolved slowly with the process of biological evolution of humans, but within the span of the past 20,000 years, not the biological but the cultural evolution of humankind has come to dominate the mode of social changes. The use of language made more complex manifestations of culture possible and acquired institutionalized forms. But culture existed even before the human attained the ability to use language. Even before that, they had culture. The ability to communicate by using linguistic symbols liberated human beings from their physical and environmental dependence. It made it possible for them to have an object and critical appraisal of nature and social phenomena. This ability is an essential component part of the cultural endowment of human beings. 2.5.2 Species specific characteristics. There are, however, similarities between human beings and animals which psychologists like Conrad Lorenz, Bshf Skinner and others have identified. Despite many common features that humans share with other animals, human beings are unique. The uniqueness lies in the perennial quest of knowledge and their capacity to succeed in it. We get the proof of this in the scientific discoveries and inventions that humankind has made possible since the prehistoric days. The thinking ability in human beings have been made possible due to their corporeal capacity and their adjustive behavior. Besides this, human beings have to go through a long period of childhood socialization. It is therefore said, child is the father of man. It is their species-specific characteristic. The brain released human beings from dependence upon their physical and environmental situations. They used their brain power to forge tools or create objects to lessen their burden. It also gave them variable power of speech, language, and memory, and capacity to organize their experiences with a historical sensibility. Through socialization, however, human self imbibes values and norms of a society, learns its language and the ability to express cognitive and emotional reaction. Cognitive is of the mental thought. Aapka thought process, that is called cognitive. This socialization, however, is never complete. The plasticity of human nature makes it possible for them to innovate, improvise, and make creative contributions. This ability of humankind that contributed towards scientific and technological knowledge, and through it to the march to civilization and progress. 2.6 Evolution of the knowing individual. The ability to associate events and experiences through use of symbols across space and time gives human beings an insight into the cause and effect relationship. It marks the beginning of a scientific logic. In their quest for knowledge, human beings simultaneously discovered science and values. Science gave them the power to establish causality and explain the events of the nature. Control of the events of the nature. The values offered them the basis to regulate their relationship with fellow human beings. Language through which we enter into both scientific and cultural dialogue is a social heritage. Both science and values thus have a social character. Human beings' quest for knowledge led them to great discoveries and scientific achievements. The technological advancement that humankind has made since the Stone Age equipment are testimony to this reality. It has been made possible through growth in their philosophical reasoning, logical skills, and methods of scientific experiments. With this advancement, the rate and volume of production of knowledge has increased manifold. One estimate is that scientific knowledge doubles every and that this rate of growth is further on the rise. Check your progress. The evolution of the thinking ability in humankind illustrates the fact that, and now the options are given and they say check one of the following for correct answer. The evolution of thinking ability of humankind illustrates the fact that human beings got this ability from the new environment, or human beings got this ability from the social interaction, or human beings got this ability by reciprocal evolution of their biology and social ability. Number 4, or human beings got this ability as a gift of God. 2.6.1 Growth of two cultures. The fast pace of growth of science has, in its turn, created problems of its relationship with values and the moral order of the society. In the Western society, scholars have expressed disappointment about the increasing gap between the scientific and the moral order of the society. Instead of integration, science and moral values are showing increasing evidence of disassociation or distancing from each other. The separation of science from values not only creates two cultures, but increasingly makes them run at cross purpose. We notice it is in the present day race for, it is misprinted here, armaments, ecological destruction through industrialization, control over human freedom, and in invention of weapons of mass annihilation like the atom bomb. Thus, for the survival and the very existence of human being, it is necessary that the social and moral character of science is maintained. The mainstream Western tradition believes in opposition between nature and culture, or between human beings and their physical environment. In contrast to the Western tradition, Indian tradition right from its inception took an organic view of the relationship between scientific knowledge and its cultural or valuable framework. In fact, science was encapsulated within the worldview of ethics, and the discovery of truth, the Satya or Satyam, was governed intrinsically by the principle of beauty, Sundaram, and welfare, Shivam, Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. No dichotomy between the sacred and the profane, between the instrumental and the transcendental, or between science and value was entertained in the Indian tradition and practice of science. The converging points between science and religion in the Indian tradition lie in the notion of science as yoga and sadhana, and the conceptualization of truth as tentative or partial. Science treats the nature of truth as being tentative and revisable, with ever new discoveries and experiments. The quest for knowledge, therefore, is perennial. The Indian traditions does not see any opposition between science, discovery of truth, and value, normative basis of truth. It seeks rather a unity among the principles of truth, goodness, and beauty. Satyam Shivam Sundaram. Check your progress 5. The notion of true culture has emerged due to the belief that, now check the point, look for the correct answer. Number 1, science is not sufficient for solving human problems. Wrong. The gap between science and humanistic social sciences has become acute. The culture of rich differs from that of poor. Rural and urban societies form two cultures. The right answer is the second one. The gap between science and humanistic social science has become acute. 2.6.2 Forms of knowledge in transition. Evolution of knowledge till date has passed through 3 distinctive stages of transition and growth as given below. Number 1, magical form of knowledge. Knowledge in the first instance grew through symbolic representation of nature, self, and of the fellow human beings. It played a central role in determining the human's relationship with both nature and culture. First, it evolved in magical and religious forms. Magic, which is the primitive human being, which for the primitive human being was equivalent to scientific knowledge, was based on principles of causality governed by 2 rules. So the first rule was that like produces like. For example, since rain is accompanied by thunder, so if one could produce something similar to thunder, rain would follow. It was common among some ancient tribes to roll down heavy boulders from hilltops to produce thunder-like sounds to bring about the rainfall. Number 2, the second rule was once apart, always apart. It was believed that if something is done to a part of a person or his or her image, the ensuing results would devolve upon the person as much. For instance, if human nail or hair would be obtained and burnt or damaged, then this burn or damage would occur also to the person to whom these parts belonged. Or if his image could be made and subjected to harm, the harm would be transferred also to the person. These laws of magic tried to establish causality as sought in modern day science, but were based on the false premises. They violated the rule of validity. That is why magic is called the pseudoscience. Some magical rituals and explanations of events, however, integrated with practical knowledge as these evolved through trial and error over a period of time. Magical rituals were very common in all crucial economic activities such as hunting, food gathering, and agriculture. Magic was integral to other rituals related to death, birth, marriage, and institution rites, etc. Mother goddess cult emerged from these magical rituals. The process of learning for human beings was from the very beginning related to their conceptions of nature, spirit, and supernatural. So there is a chart that is given. I hope you can see the chart, right? Okay. So there are 2 sections of this chart. One is headed by in magic and other in modern medicine. And okay. So in magic, a disease is disease. In modern medicine, a disease is also disease. And in magic, due to something. In modern medicine, also due to something. In magic, entry of evil spirits. But science says, the modern medicine says entry of germs. The magic says outside elements in human body. And modern medicine says bacteria and virus, which is true in both cases. For them, people that believe in that, okay? Religious beliefs grew with magical beliefs. In some cases, religious beliefs may have followed when magical principles failed. It is said that, like science, magic seeks to command nature. Religious beliefs emerge when magical commands fail to materialize. Nature, on which human beings have no control, inspires a supernatural awe. It is symbolically converted into religious forms of deities and made object of worship and prayer. The origin of cultural expressions such as dances, songs, dramas, and most objects of arts is attributed to some extent to early magical and religious rituals. As human nature and civilization advanced through evolution of agriculture, industry, and technology, sharp differentiation between religion and magic took place. Religion evolved in Europe into a more organized social institution, such as the Roman Church and various other sects. Magic, which right from its beginning was highly individualized as a form of skill and knowledge, came under pressure both from science and religion. This was manifest from persecution of magicians and witches in Europe during the medieval period. Wherever it survived, it did so in the form of the skill of an individual or a few persons. Number two, separation of science and religion. With the emergence of imperial political organization, there took place large-scale growth in trade, commerce, technology, and industrial production. This is revealed through the history of ancient civilizations like those of India, China, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. With few exceptions, now a differentiation between the scientists and the religious or priestly class took place. The separation, however, was often hazy. With the decline of the Greco-Roman civilization and the rise of Christianity, church had emerged in Europe as the most powerful social and political institution. It was a major setback to the process of differentiation between religious and scientific knowledge. All knowledge was now subject to the approval of religious authority represented by the church. Its seminaries were the only institutional organizations recognized for generation and communication of knowledge. This pattern continued for several centuries until it was challenged by the forces of Renaissance and religious reformation during the 15th and 16th centuries. During this period, contributions to science made by Galileo, Copernicus and Newton, and religious reforms initiated by Luther and Calvin made it possible that humanistic, rational, and imperial forms of knowledge could slowly emerge. Luther and Calvin emphasized the role of individual over that of church for religious salvation. Galileo and Newton offered scientific and experimental evidence instead of theological cosmology. Slowly, the nature of seminaries, which were like theological schools, changed. These were taken out of the control of the church and taken over by the city councils of citizens for administration and cultivation of knowledge. The modern university system thus came into being on a secular basis of organization, production, and communication of knowledge. This process of secularization of knowledge in the European society took several hundred years, and it was shaped under the influence of its own social, political, cultural, and economic transformations. 2.6.3 Division